This 1870 portrait looks serene until you learn why the enslaved servant hid her hands. Dr. Angela Rivers stood in the climate-controlled archive room of the Atlanta History Center, carefully examining a photograph that had arrived 3 weeks earlier. The image, dated April 1870, showed the Henderson family of Savannah, Georgia, posed in their elegant parlor. 5 years after the Civil War's end, the Hendersons appeared prosperous and serene, dressed in their finest clothes. But it was the woman in the background who had captured Angela's attention. She stood near the parlor doorway, a black woman in her early 30s, wearing a simple dark dress and white apron. Her posture was rigid, almost unnaturally still. While the Henderson family looked directly at the camera with confident expressions, the woman's eyes were cast downward, and her hands, both hands, were hidden completely within the folds of her apron. Angela had examined thousands of post-Civil War photographs during her career studying the Reconstruction era. Servants appeared in many wealthy families' portraits, usually positioned to demonstrate the family's continued status and prosperity after slavery's abolition. But something about this woman's posture troubled her. "Why hide your hands?" Angela whispered to the silent image. She checked the photograph's documentation. It had been found in an attic in Savannah by the Henderson family's descendants during an estate sale. A note attached to the frame, written in faded ink, read, "Family portrait, April 1870. Sarah in attendance. Sarah." Finally, a name? Angela photographed the image with her digital camera, zooming in on every detail. The woman's face showed no expression, carefully neutral, but her shoulders were tense, her body language suggesting someone holding themselves in rigid control. The curator, an older woman named Patricia, entered the room carrying additional documents. "I found the Henderson family papers you requested. There's quite a bit. Business ledgers, correspondence, legal documents from the Reconstruction period." Angela thanked her and began working through the papers. The Hendersons had owned a cotton plantation before the war, employing over 60 enslaved workers. After 1865, they transitioned to paying wages to former enslaved people, though the documentation suggested these wages were often theoretical, paid in credit at the plantation store rather than actual money. Then Angela found something that made her breath catch. A letter dated March 1865, just weeks before the war's end, written by Robert Henderson to his brother in Charleston. "The servants grow increasingly defiant as they hear rumors of Union victory. Yesterday I was forced to discipline Sarah for insolence. I've made certain she will remember her place, war's outcome notwithstanding." Angela needed to understand what discipline meant in Robert Henderson's letter. She contacted Dr. James Mitchell, a forensic historian who specialized in studying violence against enslaved people through medical and physical evidence. James arrived at the archive the next morning, his weathered face showing immediate interest when Angela showed him the photograph and Henderson's letter. "The timing is significant," James said, adjusting his glasses. March 1865. Sherman had already marched through Georgia, the Confederacy was collapsing, and enslaved people knew freedom was coming. Many enslavers became increasingly brutal during those final weeks, punishing people for anticipated freedom. He examined the photograph closely. "She's definitely hiding something. Look at how her arms are positioned, not casually in her apron pockets, but deliberately concealed. And see the tension in her forearms? She's gripping something, holding her hands in a very specific position." Angela pulled up additional Henderson family papers on her laptop. "I found property records showing the Hendersons kept detailed ledgers even after 1865. They documented every person who worked for them, including medical expenses." She opened a scanned ledger from 1865. The entries were coldly transactional. March 18th, 1865, medical supplies for Sarah, $2.30, burn ointment, bandages, laudanum for pain management. James leaned forward. "Burn treatment. That's what Henderson meant by discipline. He burned her." Angela felt sick. She continued through the ledger and found more entries. March 20th, additional bandages for Sarah's hands. March 25th, Dr. Whitmore visit regarding Sarah's injuries. Fee 5 widow Morse. "There's a doctor's name," Angela said. "Dr. Whitmore. If he kept medical records, they might describe her injuries specifically." James nodded grimly. Medical records from that era occasionally survived, especially if the doctor served prominent families. The Savannah Medical Society might have archives. Angela made notes rapidly. The photograph was taken in April 1870, 5 years after the burning. If the injuries were severe enough to still require hiding 5 years later, we're talking about significant scarring or disfigurement. "Branding was common," James said quietly. "Enslavers would use hot irons to burn their initials into enslaved people's skin, marking them as property. Even after the war ended, those scars remained as permanent evidence of what had been done to them." Angela traveled to Savannah, where the Georgia Historical Society maintained extensive medical records from the 19th century. The archivist, Michael Torres, had located Dr. Charles Whitmore's journals and patient records from 1860 to 1875. Dr. Whitmore served wealthy families in Savannah and the surrounding plantations, Michael explained, setting several leather-bound journals on the research table. He kept detailed notes, symptoms, treatments, outcomes. His records are considered unusually comprehensive for the period. Angela opened the journal covering 1865. her hands trembling slightly as she turned pages filled with neat medical notations. She found the entry dated March 25th, 1865. Call to Henderson Plantation regarding severe burns to female servant Sarah, approximately 30 years of age. Patient's hands show second and third degree burns across both palms and the backs of hands. Burns appear deliberately inflicted using heated metal implement, consistent with branding iron. Letters RH, clearly visible, burned into right palm. Additional burns obscure much of both hands' surface. Patient in considerable pain despite laudanum administration. Recommended daily cleaning with carbolic solution, fresh bandages, and continued pain management. Prognosis: permanent scarring certain. Possible loss of fine motor function in fingers. Patient's ability to perform delicate household tasks will be significantly impaired. Mr. Henderson stated the discipline was necessary due to patient's rebellious attitude. I advised that such severe punishment weeks before, likely emancipation, serves no purpose and creates permanent disfigurement that will identify him as perpetrator. He dismissed my concerns. Angela photographed the page, her anger building. Dr. Whitmore had documented not just the medical details, but also his moral judgment of Henderson's actions. The burns had been deliberately inflicted, branding Sarah with Henderson's initials as a final assertion of ownership, even as slavery collapsed around them. She continued through the journal and found follow-up entries from April and May 1865, documenting Sarah's slow, painful healing process. The doctor noted that the scarring was extensive and that Sarah attempted to hide her hands from view, showing deep psychological trauma alongside the physical injuries. Angela contacted Professor Dorothy Williams at Emory University, a leading expert on violence during the Reconstruction era. She sent Dorothy copies of the photograph, Henderson's letter, and Dr. Whitmore's medical records. Dorothy called her that evening, her voice tight with controlled anger. What you found is documentation of a crime that was tragically common during slavery's final months. As Union victory became inevitable, many enslavers engaged in what I call terminal violence, a final assertion of power over people they knew they were about to lose legal control over. But why brand her so brutally? Angela asked. Why not just let her go? Because men like Robert Henderson couldn't accept that their world was ending, Dorothy explained. The burns weren't just punishment, they were permanent marking. A way to ensure Sarah would carry evidence of his ownership forever. Even after she was legally free, those scars would remain, a constant reminder of what had been done to her. Dorothy continued, the timing of the photograph is also significant. April 1870, exactly 5 years after the burning. By then, Reconstruction was underway, and theoretically, former enslaved people had rights and legal protections. But in reality, many black people in the South remained trapped in exploitative labor arrangements, unable to leave or seek justice for past crimes. So Sarah was still working for the Hendersons 5 years later? Angela asked. Almost certainly not by choice. The Henderson ledgers you mentioned. Did they show wages paid to Sarah after 1865? Angela checked her notes. Yes, but the amounts are tiny, mostly credit at the plantation store, not actual money. Debt peonage, Dorothy said. The Hendersons probably claimed Sarah owed them for food, housing, medical treatment, including treatment for the injuries they caused. She was trapped by fraudulent debt, legally free but practically enslaved, and she had to hide her hands in the photograph because those burns were evidence of a crime that could theoretically be prosecuted, even under Reconstruction laws. Angela researched the photograph's creator. The image bore a small embossed mark. J. Barrett, photographer, Savannah. She discovered that Jonathan Barrett had operated a successful photography studio in Savannah from 1867 to 1885. Barrett's business records and personal papers had been donated to the Savannah College of Art and Design Archives. Angela met with archivist Lisa Chen, who had pulled Barrett's appointment books and correspondence. Barrett photographed many prominent families during Reconstruction, Lisa explained. His client list reads like a who's who of Savannah society. He was known for formal, composed portraits that emphasized his client's respectability and status. Angela found Barrett's appointment book entry for April 12, 1870. Henderson family portrait, resident sitting, 2 p.m. Full family grouping with household staff. Fee, $15. More revealing was a personal letter Barrett had written to a fellow photographer in Charleston, dated April 15, 1870. I completed a sitting for the Henderson family 3 days ago that has troubled me considerably. The family requested their house servant be included in the portrait, positioned in the background to demonstrate their benevolent treatment of former slaves. The woman, called Sarah, stood rigidly throughout the session, her hands hidden completely in her apron. When I attempted to pose her with hands visible, as is customary for balanced composition, she became visibly distressed. Mrs. Henderson intervened sharply, stating Sarah's hands need not be shown. I observed terrible tension in the woman's posture and what I can only describe as barely controlled fear in her expression. After the sitting, as I packed my equipment, Sarah approached me briefly. She said nothing, but she looked directly at me with such intensity, as if begging me to understand something, to see something. Then Mrs. Henderson called her away. I've photographed hundreds of people, but I've never felt such discomfort about an image. Whatever story lies behind that woman's hidden hands, I suspect it is far darker than the Henderson family's Serene portrait suggests. Angela needed to trace what happened to Sarah after 1870. She returned to the Henderson family papers, searching for any mention of Sarah in subsequent years. The plantation ledgers continued through 1875, with Sarah listed among the workers and tiny wage payments recorded monthly. Then, in September 1875, the entries for Sarah stopped abruptly. Angela found a brief notation in Robert Henderson's correspondence from that month. Sarah departed without notice. Good riddance to troublesome woman. Have hired replacement. No forwarding address, no explanation. Sarah had simply disappeared from the Henderson records. Angela contacted genealogist Marcus Johnson, who specialized in tracing formerly enslaved people through Reconstruction-era documents. She provided him with all the information she had on Sarah: approximate age, location, time period. Marcus called back 2 weeks later. I found her. Or at least, I found someone who matches all the details. A woman named Sarah Williams appears in the 1880 census in Philadelphia, working as a domestic servant for a Quaker family. Age fits, origin listed as Georgia, and there's a notation in the census taker's remarks that's very unusual. What does it say? Subject shows extensive scarring on both hands, states injuries resulted from assault during slavery, subject literate, seeking legal counsel regarding past crimes committed against her person. Angela's pulse quickened. She went north and tried to seek justice? It appears so, and I found more. There are records at the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. They provided legal assistance to formerly enslaved people seeking reparations or prosecution of crimes committed during slavery. Their records show a Sarah Williams consulted with them in 1881 regarding permanent injuries inflicted by former enslaver in Georgia. Marcus sent Angela digital copies of the documents. Sarah had told her story to lawyers at the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, providing details of the March 1865 burning and her subsequent years trapped in debt peonage with the Henderson family. The lawyers had taken her case, but ultimately concluded that prosecution would be impossible. Georgia authorities would never extradite Robert Henderson, and Sarah lacked resources to pursue the case herself. Angela traveled to Philadelphia to examine the Pennsylvania Abolition Society's full case file on Sarah Williams. The archives, housed at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, contained dozens of pages documenting Sarah's testimony and the lawyer's assessment of her case. Sarah's statement, transcribed by a society lawyer in April 1881, was devastating in its detail. In March 1865, when we all knew freedom was coming, I spoke up at dinner. I said to Mr. Henderson that he would soon be free people and he should prepare to pay us wages for our work. He became enraged. He said no law would ever make me free from him, that I was his property forever, regardless of what the government declared. That night, 2 overseers held me down while Mr. Henderson heated a branding iron. He burned his initials into my right palm first, RH, pressing the iron deep until I could smell my own flesh cooking. Then he burned my left palm and the backs of both hands, saying he wanted me marked permanently so I would never forget who owned me. I nearly died from infection in the following weeks. Dr. Whitmore treated me, and he was kind, but the damage was permanent. My hands are covered in scar tissue. I have limited movement in 3 fingers on my right hand. The pain never completely went away. After the war ended, I tried to leave, but Mr. Henderson claimed I owed him money. For food, for the medical treatment he had caused me to need, for housing. He said I couldn't leave until the debt was paid. For 10 years I worked for almost nothing, trapped. In 1870, he made me stand for a family photograph. He wanted to show visitors that his former slaves still worked for him voluntarily, that he treated us well. Mrs. Henderson told me to hide my hands. She said the photograph was meant to show harmony and prosperity, and my scarred hands would spoil the composition and raise uncomfortable questions. I stood there, hiding the evidence of what they had done to me, while they posed as respectable people. I felt like I was lying, participating in covering up the truth. But I had no choice. I was still trapped, still dependent on them. Finally, in 1875, a Quaker woman visiting Savannah saw my hands by accident. She helped me escape north, gave me money for train passage. I've been free since then, truly free. But I want justice. I want Mr. Henderson held accountable for what he did to me. The Pennsylvania Abolition Society lawyers had written a detailed assessment of Sarah's case, which Angela read with growing frustration. The legal analysis was thorough, but pessimistic. Miss Williams presents a compelling case of extreme violence perpetrated during slavery's final days. The evidence is substantial. Medical records from Dr. Whitmore documenting the injuries, the timing correlating with Miss Williams's testimony, and the physical scars still visible on her person. However, several insurmountable legal obstacles prevent prosecution. First, Georgia authorities refuse to cooperate with Northern inquiries regarding crimes committed during or immediately after the Civil War. Multiple requests to Georgia's Attorney General regarding similar cases have gone unanswered. Second, witnesses are unlikely to testify. Dr. Whitmore, though his records support Miss Williams' account, has declined to participate in any legal proceedings. He states he cannot afford to alienate his wealthy Georgia clients. Third, even if the case proceeded, Georgia juries would be composed of white men, many of whom are former Confederates or enslavers themselves. The likelihood of conviction is virtually zero. Fourth, Miss Williams lacks financial resources to pursue an extended legal battle. The Society can provide limited assistance, but cannot fund travel to Georgia, extended court proceedings, or appeals. Recommendation: we advise Ms. Williams that while her case is morally just, it is legally impractical. We suggest she focus on building her new life in Philadelphia and seeking justice through the historical record rather than the courts. Angela found a handwritten note attached to the assessment, signed by Sarah. I understand the law cannot help me, but I want the truth recorded. Someday, someone should know what Robert Henderson did, and that I did not submit willingly to his violence or his photograph. The Society had kept Sarah's testimony on file, along with copies of Dr. Whitmore's medical records that Sarah had somehow obtained before leaving Georgia. Angela realized she was looking at exactly what Sarah had hoped for. Someone, someday, discovering the truth and telling her story. Marcus Johnson continued his genealogical research, tracing Sarah Williams forward from 1881. She had married in 1883 to a man named Thomas Johnson, a teacher at a school for black children in Philadelphia. They had 3 children between 1884 and 1890. Sarah appeared in Philadelphia city directories through 1910, listed as a domestic worker and later as a seamstress. Her husband Thomas died in 1908, but Sarah continued working until at least 1912, when she would have been approximately 77 years old. Her death certificate, filed in 1915, listed the cause as pneumonia and her age as 80. One detail caught Angela's attention. Under distinguishing marks, the attending physician had written extensive scarring, both hands. Even at the end of her life, the evidence of what had been done to her remained visible. Marcus traced Sarah's children forward through census records, marriage certificates, and death records. Her youngest son, William Johnson, had moved to New York City in 1915 and had 5 children. One of his daughters, Dorothy, had married and had children of her own in the 1940s and 1950s. I found a living descendant, Marcus told Angela during their video call. Dorothy's daughter, Patricia Morgan, is 81 years old and lives in Brooklyn. I spoke with her briefly and explained your research. She wants to talk with you. Angela called Patricia that evening. When she explained about the photograph and Sarah's hidden hands, Patricia was silent for a long moment. My grandmother Dorothy told me stories about her grandmother Sarah, Patricia finally said, her voice thick with emotion. She said Sarah had terrible scars on her hands from slavery days, that she was burned by a white man who wanted to mark her as his property forever. Grandmother said Sarah was very private about her hands, always wore gloves when possible, even decades later. Did your grandmother know about the photograph? Angela asked. No, Sarah never mentioned it. But grandmother said Sarah often talked about how formerly enslaved people had to hide the truth about what had been done to them. She said white people wanted to believe slavery had been mild and kindly, that black people had been content. Sarah said she had participated in that lie once and regretted it for the rest of her life. Patricia paused. Is the photograph still available? Can I see what was done to my great-great-grandmother? 6 months later, the Atlanta History Center unveiled a new exhibition titled Hidden Hands, Violence and Silence in the Post-War South. The 1870 Henderson family portrait occupied the central position, with Sarah's hidden hands now explained through detailed panels surrounding it. Angela stood at the opening ceremony alongside Patricia Morgan and 3 other descendants of Sarah Williams Johnson. The exhibition included Dr. Whitmore's medical records, Henderson's letters, Sarah's testimony to the Pennsylvania Abolition Society, and the photographer's troubled reflections on the sitting. But the most powerful element was a life-sized reproduction of the photograph, with one change. Digital imaging specialists had worked with medical historians to create a scientifically accurate rendering of what Sarah's hands looked like beneath the apron, based on Dr. Whitmore's detailed descriptions of the burns. The reconstructed image showed hands covered in thick scar tissue, with the letters RH burned deep into the right palm. The rendering was displayed beside the original photograph, forcing viewers to confront what had been deliberately hidden. Patricia spoke during the opening ceremony, her voice steady but emotional. My great-great-grandmother Sarah survived violence that was meant to mark her as property forever. She was forced to hide the evidence of that violence in this photograph, participating in a lie about the past. But she never stopped hoping that someday the truth would be known. For 154 years, this photograph has existed, and most people who saw it probably thought it showed a peaceful domestic scene, proof that black people were treated well in the post-war South. But Sarah's hidden hands told a different story, a story of brutal violence, of justice denied, of trauma that lasted a lifetime. Today we finally see what Sarah wanted the world to see. We honor her courage in surviving, in escaping, in trying to seek justice even when the law failed her. And we commit to telling the truth about the past, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. The exhibition included an interactive component where visitors could explore other post-war photographs, learning to read the subtle signs of coercion, trauma, and hidden violence. Many images that appeared serene at first glance revealed darker truths upon closer examination. Posed smiles that didn't reach the eyes, rigid postures suggesting fear, carefully arranged compositions that hid evidence of abuse. Angela had written an accompanying book, Sarah's Story, One Woman's Journey from Violence to Voice, which detailed the full scope of her research. The book included not just Sarah's story, but also broader context about terminal violence during slavery's final months, the fraudulent practices that trapped formerly enslaved people after 1865, and the systemic denial of justice during Reconstruction. Standing in the exhibition hall, watching visitors study Sarah's photograph with new understanding, Angela felt the weight of responsibility and privilege. She had been able to do what Sarah could not: force the truth into visibility, create a permanent record that could not be hidden or denied. Robert Henderson had burned his initials into Sarah's flesh, intending to mark her as his property forever. Instead, those same initials had become evidence of his crime, documented in medical records and testimony that outlived him. Sarah had hidden her hands in the photograph, but in doing so, she had created a mystery that eventually demanded explanation. The rope around her wrist, the hidden hands in an apron, these small details in old photographs were not accidents. They were silent testimonies, waiting for someone to notice, to question, to investigate. And once uncovered, they transformed peaceful images into powerful evidence of truths that many had tried to bury. Sarah's hands, hidden for so long, were finally visible, and her story, silenced for more than a century, was finally being heard.